Hi, I'm Dr. Christina Spalding with Smart Dog Training and Behavior, and this video is a short preview of the upcoming Applied Ethology of Dogs course. So this is just a sampling of the course goals. We're going to be talking about what ethology is briefly and how it relates to dog behavior. We're also going to be discussing the behavior of some of the wild canids like wolves and coyotes and what that can teach us about behavior in our dogs. And then we'll be outlining what we know about development in dogs, including spending some time talking about the socialization period. This is just a sampling of the goals. If you want a full list, you can go to the course syllabus. But what I'm going to do today is spend a few minutes talking about the socialization period. So often, the number that I see most often that is thrown out there about the socialization period in dogs is from 3 to 12 weeks, or sometimes 3 to 14 weeks. I've also seen 6 to 12 weeks. And what I want to do is I want to spend a little bit of time talking about where this comes from, what research this is based on, and what we really do and don't know about this period in puppies. So many of you are probably already aware that this is based on research that was done by Scott and Fuller in the 1950s and 60s. And so what they did is they raised quite a few litters of puppies at their research facility, and they then looked at their development over time, their early development. Specifically, well, they looked at a few different things, but one of the things that they looked at is their attraction to people and their fear of people. So prior to 3 weeks, they really weren't looking at puppies because they're not particularly active or engaged prior to that period. So what they found is that attraction to people was highest from 3 to 5 weeks of age. And what they actually did is this was the first exposure. So the puppies were isolated from people until about 3 weeks, or depending on what group they were in, but there was a 3-week time point and a 5-week time point, as well as several others. And those time points were the ones where if puppies were first exposed to people at ages 3 weeks or ages 5 weeks, you saw the most attraction to people. They also found that fear was very low at those time points. So at 3 and 5 weeks, they showed high attraction to people and low fear or avoidance of people. Starting at 5 weeks, that fear started to increase, and the recovery time from fear also started to increase at 5 weeks. They also looked at 7 and 9 weeks of age. The other thing that they took a look at was leash walking, and then taking food after they did this little leash walking course. So puppies that were socialized, again, for the first time, first exposure to people at either 5 or 7 weeks, did the best with this leash walking exercise. It showed the least amount of fear. However, the puppies that were first exposed at 9 weeks also did fairly well. And then they had another group of puppies that served as the control group, and those puppies were unfortunately isolated until 14 weeks of age with no human interaction. And what they found with those puppies is that they were never really able to recover from that. They were never really able to feel comfortable around people. Although I will say, they really didn't do an in-depth, study of puppies after 14 weeks of age. They had one puppy that was placed in a home and did not recover. I'm not sure what happened to the remaining puppies, to be honest. So the conclusion based on this study is that the optimal socialization period is 3 to 12 weeks, or again, in some textbooks, you'll see 3 to 14 weeks. However, they don't really explain how they reached the conclusion of 14 weeks. And they started socialization with some puppies at 3 weeks, some at 5, some at 7, and some at 9. And then they had the 14-week group. So we don't really have a lot of details about what happens between 9 and 14 weeks. So I'm a little bit skeptical of this 12 to 14 week number that's given. And so what I want to do is I want to talk through some of the issues about this research, or the limitations in terms of what we can, how much we can really generalize this and how much we really know about this socialization period. So again, I see this number referenced over and over again. This 12 to 14 weeks is the date, the end date of the socialization period. And if it's cited at all, it goes back to Scott and Fuller. But reading Scott and Fuller, there is no rationalization for why they determine that it ends at 12 to 14 weeks versus possibly earlier. And as I said, the puppies, you had puppies that were isolated until 14 weeks and then were exposed to people for the first time. And then these, I didn't mention the 2 weeks, they were tested at 2 weeks, but again, there's not a lot of interaction at that point. So really we're looking at 3, 5, 7, and 9 weeks. But we have several weeks there where we don't have data. So I don't know, this cutoff here of 12 to 14 weeks appears to me to be a little bit arbitrary. Certainly, once they hit 14 weeks, it's problematic, but we don't have information, you know, it could be earlier. So we don't have information about that. Also, this is going to vary with breed, and they do talk about this in Scott and Fuller, but I don't know how well it gets translated. So the developmental time periods vary with breed, and there's been, Scott and Fuller's looked at this, and there was some more recent research by Catherine Lord that looked at this. Both studies only use a handful of breeds, but I do think it's important to understand that even if we assume that that 3 to 12 or 3 to 14 week number is accurate, it does seem to have a genetic influence, and so it's going to vary with breed as well as other individual differences. The other thing that I think is really important to note is that these puppies were not raised in homes. They were raised in research facilities. They did have access to the outdoors, but it was a very, very different environment. And so again, we have to be a little bit cautious about how we generalize that to puppies that are being raised in homes. And the other thing that I think is really important is looking in detail about what they measured and how long they measured it. So what they looked at was attraction to and avoidance of people. And so they had some people that were passively sitting in the enclosure, and other tests had a person that was actively interacting with the puppies. And they just looked at sort of how attracted the puppies were versus how long they would avoid the people. So this is an important measure, but it certainly doesn't tell us everything about behavior. As I said, they also looked at willingness to walk on a leash, and then they looked at willingness to take food after the leash walk. This information, again, this is important, it's useful, but there's a lot missing here. So, you know, we don't have information about, you know, necessarily trainability or recovery from stress, or, you know, there's a lot of things that we care about as dog owners and dog trainers that are not necessarily included here. And the other thing that I think is really important to note is that the assessment stopped at 14 weeks. So we don't know, you know, we don't have any information about the long-term effects of being isolated for different time periods. And so, and based on what we know about stress in dogs, we know that dogs that, or animals in general that experience stress during these early rapid periods of development, often that doesn't manifest until later in life, and it can manifest in more subtle but very important ways. So it can have cognitive impacts, it can impact levels of anxiety and even aggression in some cases. And so so what I'm trying to say basically is it's great that we have this research. It's great that we have some kind of parameters, but I don't think that that should be considered the final answer at all. There's a lot of information that we're still missing. And so this is an area where I think we really need to make sure we're continuing to do active research. So you can certainly use that number as our best guess estimate right now, but I think that's the best we can say about it, is that it's a best guess. So hopefully that gives you some information about the type of things that we'll be covering in this course. If you would like to get more information, this is my contact information, and there will be clickable links. If you're probably watching this on YouTube, there'll be clickable links in the description or comments as well. You can get more information on the course from the website, and you can also email me directly if you have questions. Thank you.